Hey guys, welcome back to General Chemistry 1. Today we are going to talk about using those significant figures in calculation. So once we correctly determine the number of significant figures, we can then use them in multiplication and division. And unfortunately in chemistry, when we have numbers, we don't just record a number and that's the end of it. Very often we are calculating with those numbers. You're doing multiplication, division problems, or addition, subtraction. So significant figures in calculations. We're going to talk about the rules and then we'll look at some examples. So remember when we're looking at significant figures, we're talking about some sort of instrumentation gave us that number. So when we go to calculate with those numbers, we cannot add in any certainty or take away any uncertainty in that number. We have to make sure that the numbers we report are as reliable as we can possibly report them to be. So that's why we're using these rules, is so we maintain that reliability, that certainty with those instruments. So we've got two sets of rules. We've got multiplication division rules and we've got addition subtraction rules. Let me first talk about multiplication division. With multiplication division, we're going to look at the number of significant figures that are present. So I kind of like to call this one the weakest link, if you will. So if we're multiplying two numbers together and say one of them has 5 significant figures, one of them has 3 significant figures, when we go to report our answer will be limited to 3 significant figures. Why is that? Well, if one instrument had enough reliability to give us 5 sig figs, and one instrument only had the reliability to give us 3 significant figures, when we report our number, we can say, you know what, I'm really only certain about 3 of those. Like after 3 numbers, uncertainty starts to creep in and I can't give you any better answer. So remember, we're limited by the crappiest instrument, if you will. So multiplication division, we're looking at weakest link. When we're talking about addition subtraction, so kind of draw a line in the sand and look a different way, this is a completely different set of rules. So when we're talking about addition and subtraction, we're counting decimal places. So we're counting decimal places. So for example, if I have one number that has 3 decimal places, I have one number that has 1 decimal place. If I add those two numbers together, I have to cut off my number after that first or after 1 decimal place. It doesn't really matter how many numbers are in front of that decimal. It could be 2 numbers in front of the decimal. It could be 5 numbers. But I keep all of those numbers and then only 1 decimal place. So that's the big difference there, is we're counting decimal places. All right, so this begs the question, well, what do we do with the other digits that we drop? So there's rounding rules. Kind of the rule of thumb is the number that you're keeping. If the very next one is 5 or greater, you would round up when you keep a number. If the very next one is under 5, then you just keep the number the same and you simply drop the other numbers. I'm not really going to split hairs over rounding, and I think your active chemistry does a pretty good job of assuming rounding up or down, and it doesn't take off for that either. So that's the rounding rules if you really want to know them. We've got bigger fish to fry, so let's not split hairs over rounding. All right, so here we see our first example. So first we're going to look at multiplication division. So looking at this multiplication division problem, let's say I took 3 measurements. Let's say I wanted to know the volume. So I took a length measurement, a width measurement, the height measurement. Now I'm going to multiply those numbers together. Okay. So I'm going to take these numbers and I'm going to plug them into my calculator. Well, your calculator is not as smart as you would like it to be. Your calculator is going to just spit out a ridiculously long number it's not going to ever consider significant figures. So that's going to be something that you have to do for it. So I look back at the numbers that I put in. This one has 3 significant figures. This one has 5 significant figures, and this one has 2 significant figures. So when I report my answer is limited to 2 sig figs. I can only report 2 digits, and that is it. So when I report my number, I would report 45. That's it. That's all I can report. Okay. Let's look at another example here. So think about it, then we'll talk about it. All right, looking at our 2 numbers. This first number, we see that it has 1, 2, 3, 4 significant figures. Looking at this one, we see that this one has 1, 2, 3 significant figures. So the 0, remember, is after a number after a decimal, so we do count that. So 4 sig figs and 3 sig figs. I plug these 2 numbers into my calculator, and this is what my not so smart calculator spits out, a ridiculously big number. This number, however, is going to be limited to 3 sig figs. I can only report 3 digits that are significant. So the number that I will report is 0.966. If you write down 0.965, that is fine too. Just know that you can only report the 3. Okay. Now we're going to move on to addition and subtraction. So for addition and subtraction, remember, we're counting decimal places. So the best way to do this to get proficient at it is to stack those numbers right on top of each other. So line up the decimals and stack the numbers right on top. After you've done that, you can identify the number that has the least decimal places. So this first one has 1 decimal place. The second one has 1, 2, 3 decimal places. So I'm going to find the one that has the least. So here's the 1 decimal place. I'm going to draw a line down. What this line is going to allow me to do is when my calculator spits out a ridiculously large number, I know that I will keep, come on, pen. All right, I know that I will keep everything to the left, and I will throw away anything to the right. So I'll keep everything to the left, throw away anything on the right. And remember, it doesn't matter how many numbers I have on the left here. It could be 1,200.8. I'm still going to cut it off at the same spot here, right at that 8. Okay. All right, let's look at another example. So think about it, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so here we have 3 numbers stacked one on top of each other. The first one, we see it has 3 decimal places. The second one, we see it has 3 decimal places. And the third one has 2 decimal places. So if I were to draw my line on this one, I would draw it after the 0.98. So I would be able to keep just the negative 8.66. So that is calculations, addition and subtraction, multiplication and division. From here, moving forward in this chapter, I will assume that these rules are something that you are thinking of, considering, and when you do answer your questions, I expect you to answer them to the correct number of significant figures. I hope you guys found this helpful.